And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Benched with Bubba, episode 700. Coming at you with some more Steamer discussion. We're going to talk about what Steamer's projections are compared to current NFBC ADP. So it'll be fun there to see what the outliers and the positives and the negatives. Do we agree? Do we disagree? That's the beautiful things about projections. And I know people go, "You're talking Steamer again." Well, guess what? ATC, the bat. We'll talk about them too when they come out because projections are kind of the way a lot of the models are run these days. First off, you can find me on Twitter at BDentric and my co-host, as always, to start the week on Twitter at BreakingBen_T. Ben Tid, how are we doing, my friend?
Doing very well, Bubba. Thanks for having me on again. I don't know why I just said that because it's been like a thing now, but I think I was used to saying that for so long. Now it's kind of stuck, but yeah, good to be back for another Steamer episode, even though it is the third in a row, which is fine because there's a lot of players to discuss that we haven't talked about yet. And I think I forget if you said it, but it's episode 700, so that's a big round number. Congrats on that. But I mean, it's probably half of what you've done in your career though, because you have so many other different podcasts that you do. But it's cool to be number 700.
I appreciate it. Yep. No, this is the one that started it all, Benched with Bubba. So it's fun. I've done, way more than 1,400 shows between everything else. So, when you do one a day for 5 days a week for multiple seasons and whatnot, it adds up real quick. So, it's been fun. More to go. Looking forward to it. Don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So we'll keep running. It's the one thing I was told when I started. I tell every future podcaster that has what's a thing you'd recommend, I say, just be consistent and keep doing it. And someone told me out the gate that the hardest thing is to get to 100. Once you get there, it's almost a lot easier to keep going type thing. So you'll see a lot of shows. Keep that in mind. A lot of shows come out. Not many get to 100. So thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. 700 didn't think I'd get there when I started. I'll tell you that much, but I'm pretty pumped, obviously, that I did get there, and you've helped quite a bit along the way. So I appreciate that. And let's talk Steamer. Let's have some fun here. So I'll let Ben elaborate on this shortly, but we're going to be using his Steamer sheet that he's created. He's updated it a bit and tweaked it some more and added some cool things to it. But we're basically looking at some players. We each picked 10 hitters that Steamer likes more or less than current ADP. So, Ben, that's my easy example of this explanation of it. Why don't you elaborate on what we'll be discussing this evening?
Yeah, it's basically the same workbook that we've been looking at the past couple of weeks when we did pitchers and hitters. But now I've added I think when I added, there were 20 DCs, draft champions, done on NFBC. So that ADP for all 20 is added to this, and it's showing next to each of the projections for each player. I also have, and originally we had the Steamer ranking per my Z-scores for each hitter, and now I have the hitter ADP rank to compare, and that's kind of where we're looking at the value, whether it's good or bad, at least in Steamer's mind. And I didn't try to go solely off of the delta, like the difference, like the larger differences between the Steamer rank and the ADP rank. But as like you were double checking your work before we started, I think we definitely hit on some players that have some pretty big discrepancies in where they're going versus what Steamer thinks about them.
Yeah, and that's why it was fun making the list because there's definitely some discrepancies we're going to talk about here. But there's also just some that maybe are discrepancies in our mind and how did Steamer see it and stuff along those lines. We have some listener questions for some players to discuss as well, which is great because honestly, I don't think we wrote any of those names down. So that makes it even more fun to talk about some more players for everybody. But we'll have some fun along the lines. Like Ben said, we'll have the hitter rankings, the Steamer hitter rankings compared to the ADP hitter rankings, and thus the delta is the difference between the two. See, I'm going to learn a lot by the end of the time with you, man. Delta, that's a word most think I would never have said on this show. So, and I actually kind of know what it means. So we got that going for us here.
You're coming a long way.
A long ways. One day, maybe episode 1600, I'll actually be able to create a spreadsheet. But let's not get too excited on this one just yet. But I'm going to start us off here. Again, 10 hitters each. We're going to go back and forth and give our thoughts on them. But I didn't mean to be biased. Some of these picks might seem biased because guys I've liked for a while, but that's kind of why they stand out probably more so to me. But Jung Hoo Lee, this is a player we've talked about on other shows that we've done. I've talked about on other shows, period, because he's kind of polarizing to me because we saw a very small sample last year, and we knew kind of an idea of who he was when he came over to the U.S. Very good hit tool. Power was a question mark. Little bit of speed, but kind of like a Luis Arraez outfielder type dude. Stephen Kwan is like how I like to compare Jung Hoo Lee when people look at him. And when we look at the Steamer, they have him ranked as the 51st hitter right now. And ADP has him as the 175th hitter right now, giving 124 delta gap between the two, difference between the two. I'm going to annoy people by the end of this. And it's just fun because you look at Steamer's projection, 293 average, 13 homers, 12 steals. That's pretty strong, all things considered. Again, you're looking at his ADP of around 270 in November ADPs. But it's a player that can produce pretty well against – I compare him to Kwan because you look at Stephen Kwan, his November ADP is there you go, is 156. So we're talking like almost 120 pick differential between the two. And I think there's a lot of similarities. So Steamer likes Jung Hoo Lee. So I'm trying to say, I should have said it out the gate. They like Jung Hoo Lee. What are your thoughts, though? Because 14 homers, 13 steals. I think the power might be a little aggressive. Never know. But a 293 average, I think I could definitely get behind. 88 runs scored. It'll be nice leading off for the Giants. So what's your thoughts when you see the Jung Hoo Lee thing? Because this is one that stands out that Steamer's a big fan of, whereas the rest of, let's say, just the drafting market is not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I think if he played a full year, maybe he'd have a much higher ADP. Who knows? But just basically having a lost season kind of left him where he was going last season. And so you mentioned the average, and you mentioned Stephen Kwan and Luis Arraez. Lee is one of 4 hitters that kind of are anchored here because of their average projection. So the 293 is basically 2/3, maybe almost 3/4 of his projected value when you look at the Z-score breakdown. And I mean, the 88 runs is awesome, but it's not nearly as high of a component as the average is. And of course, on a lot of podcasts, people will always say that, or not always, but frequently say that average is the least, or is probably the hardest to project for a hitter. The counting stats with playing time should be in the relatively, I don't know, it should be relatively easy to kind of get an idea of where like homers will be for a hitter and steals and RBIs and runs. But the average is so dependent on, like we did the BABIP show. So who knows, maybe someone's unlucky with their BABIP, their K rate spikes for whatever reason, or maybe it goes down and they hit way higher. You can go in either direction. And I think Lee, well, he did have some decent. So the problem is with Lee, if you look at his underlying metrics, it's such a small sample, you can't really take too much out of it. Mm-hmm. But he had over a 91% contact rate, and I think he had like 100 plate appearances or just over that last year. He only struck out 8% of the time. His XBA was 284. His hard hit was actually pretty decent, 41%, which isn't awful. It's average, a little bit above average. And he's kind of like I think Arraez as an outfielder is a good comparison for Lee, and it's kind of with the other, like I don't think we actually put down Arraez, but a couple other guys with high average projections, they're going to be very team dependent, and it's at least with Lee, he's going near pick 300, or at least he was for all 20 DCs, where at that point you don't really need solid contributors and homers and RB and steals, hopefully, but his runs and RBIs, 62 isn't terrible. He'll probably hit lead off for the Giants, and if he hit that average, he'll be very valuable at that ADP, I think. So worth the gamble, I think.
Yeah, that's why I'm very excited. That ADP alone, if you, like you said, you should have most of your core statistics, at least for your starters, pretty much mapped out by then, at least have an idea. So a great batting average asset, that's one stat we talk about a lot, that there's a reason you draft certain players early is to get batting average help, because it just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping as you go through ADP. This is one of those that does not drop for you, which is nice. And like 293, like you said, a small sample might seem high, and I agree with that. But it's also one of those we look back at the KBO, and again, not the same as Major League Baseball, but he was always well over 300 for the most part, like 340, 350, 360 most years. The dude's 26 this year, so super young as well, which is a plus. And he's shown like mediocre speed and a little bit of pop from time to time. So it is very intriguing, a very intriguing potential from Jung Hoo Lee. Like I said, the power speed, but at worst, you get really good on-base skills with his great plate discipline. His batting average should lead to runs with the Giants. So very intriguing at that ADP. I can't wait to see what that ADP looks like come like March. Because I think right now he's one of the perks to drafting early if you're a believer in what Jung Hoo Lee can do. All right, who's your first one, Ben?
I actually forgot I had Luis Arraez written down. So this is perfect. We can go right into Lee's clone, the infielder version. One thing that stands out for Arraez is, of course, he's going to be projected for a great average. He's the 45th hitter projected by Steamer, only going as the 109th. So not quite as far down as Lee is, but pretty good discount compared to what Steamer thinks. and they have him for almost 90 runs, which is terrific, 300 average. So essentially same profile as Lee. But the thing I just looked up too, because I remember noticing this earlier, was 10 homers and 9 steals are the projected totals for Arraez by Steamer. I think those are his career highs in both, but in different seasons, which is interesting. It's interesting to see them combine those two career highs for a projection this year. I don't get why they would think he would attain both now after having him. I mean, it's possible, or it's in his range of outcomes, but he had 4 homers this past season, 2024. He had the 1 year, he had 2 in 2021. 9, like basically doubled his career high of 4 before that. He's not very fast, but and people could be quick to write off Arraez as like a legit pick, but I think Jason Santo, who had 2 top teams in the top 3 of the main event, I think he had Arraez on one of his teams, if I'm not mistaken. So with the right build, it is possible. And same thing goes with Arraez, that goes with Lee. If your team needs the average and the run help and you're okay in homers and steals, then it makes sense. But I think at pick 180 or 184 is what his total ADP is in DCs. It's much earlier. It's like 7 rounds earlier, at least in 15 teamers, than Lee, and that's still more of like a core piece of your team, I think. So I would definitely pass on Arraez for Lee if ADP stayed this way and I needed that kind of profile. But Arraez in the right build is valuable per the projections. It's hard to get that puzzle piece to fit sometimes.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's why it's been tough for me year after year to draft Arraez, because he seems to go pretty high compared to what I want from him because of the skill set. But on the right team, yes, definitely makes sense. If you go power heavy, you need batting average. We know what you're going to get out of him, barring something crazy. Also, we got to remember last year, like we saw the dip in the barrel rate below 2%. The hard hit was down once again. It's not his normal skill set, obviously, but he also had the wrist/hand injury that he had surgery on when the season ended. So he played through that for quite a while, apparently. Reports came out after the season. Maybe something to be said about that when it came to any potential power that Luis Arraez would have. The other thing is you mentioned career highs in 2 different categories. I can't wait till Steamer updates a few more times because I'm real curious. I know we've talked about it on a few shows, and when Ryan and I did some Steamer stuff, we talked about it. There are a lot of players with a lot of career highs in certain categories. They're just like, how did you come up with these? Like, usually we talk about projections being kind of 3-year averages or with some little simple secret sauce or something like that. So to have so many, like you expect some, sure, you get it. Like some guys, as they get older, you want to give them a boost or whatever. It makes sense. But to have so many go down this road, like when we talked pitchers, Ben, there were so many guys getting career high in innings. You're like, what in the world? Like, how's that even possible? So on and so forth. Like some guys will. That's the reality of it. Not all will, though. And that's where navigating the minefields can get quite tricky at times. There's no denying that. All right. My second one tonight is going to be a first baseman that has been kind of tricky year after year. Last year, he finally showcased, I guess, some fantasy appeal, especially as either a streamer in 12s, maybe a corner infielder in 15s. And that's Andrew Vaughn. He had 19 home runs last year, 21 the year before, 17. Like he's been a decent power source, hit 246 last year. He's played 149 games back-to-back years, so he's starting to show at least kind of a skill set. It might not meet the ceiling we once hoped for with one of the top picks in a draft, but still pretty good. Now you look at Steamer. Steamer has Andrew Vaughn as the 110th hitter, according to their hitter rankings, where ADP hitter rankings has him at 176 with an ADP getting close to 300, like 290-ish in DC. So, again, a guy you don't have to pay a lot for. So he's actually been a guy I've been kind of interested in because with first base dropping off so much, if you want to wait for like first base or at least for an early second first baseman, Vaughn has shown he can play back-to-back years. Steamer's got him for 146 games, another 23 homers, and a 254 average in a world where 254 averages will play. They'll play really well, especially as you go down. But at the same point, team context, run production is going to be tricky. So like when I see 70 runs, he hasn't eclipsed 67 in his career. That's his highest. Usually it's 60, 55 to 60. The White Sox have a lot to do with that, obviously. So Steamer, very excited about Andrew Vaughn. Again, 27 years old, still young. Team context has to make you be a little pessimistic about what's taking place with Andrew Vaughn. But at the same time, if we're looking at, I guess, what Steamer considers value, or not value, this one being value on draft day, Andrew Vaughn stands out as at least an option to consider as you get into the close to pick 300, which is around the 20th or 19th, 20th round in your DCs. That's not the worst thing. I think a corner infield or another first baseman, like I said.
Right. I was big on drafting Andrew Vaughn last year because his projection once again stood out because of some. If I were to pull up last year's projections, I'm sure they would be almost a mirror image of what Steamer has right now. Steamer, of course, is a little more offensively optimistic, but the 79 RBI, I think he had 80. Yeah, he had 80 in 2023. And it's kind of a catch-22 with the White Sox because they're so bad. He's projected to bat third, but if Robert gets traded, if Benintendi becomes a 2-homer hitter again, then Vaughn could struggle to drive in runs and also score runs. But his lineup spot should be pretty safe, and I think the playing time projection of over 600 plate appearances is really driving the runs and the RBIs with it. And his barrel rate has been fine. He's at least league average, and it's a friendly park. He was 8.4% in 2023, and then this past year he was 9.3% for his barrel rate. Hard hits above 43% both years. Vaughn went a little more fly ball heavy this year, 45.8%, almost 10 percentage points higher than 2023. So you like to see that, and doesn't strike out a lot. So he's solid. He's definitely more of a 15-team play, and especially he's so valuable on draft and hold because he hasn't really missed time in his career. Anyone can always get hurt, of course, but he does have value in draft and holds, I think. So I'm sure I'll be targeting him at some point.
Yep, most definitely love that kind of the way I look at it. Anything can happen, but it brings like a floor. We kind of know who he is, so I enjoy that in those 15s. Who is your next player to discuss? A guy that was a fab darling in 2024.
Yeah, kind of going back to the average anchors, and this time it's Xavier Edwards, who I did have on a couple teams, so I know firsthand of what he can do. And in the projection, let me look up Xavier. I should have had this readily available. Xavier is pretty high up, actually. He's hitter 67, and his ADP is hitter 99. So, and that's 169.4 on average in the 20 DCs that have been drafted so far. A little bit lower than Arraez and Lee, but 80 runs is his projection. 35 steals, that's a very healthy total. 282 average, and 6 homers. I've heard people say that that should probably be half of what it is because Edwards has 0 pop. He only had this is really bad. You think Arraez, he's on the level of Arraez. Xavier had a 1.8% barrel rate this year, 50% ground ball rate, 86.1 average exit velocity, and his X slug was 328. And those are almost as red as it can get on my sheet. But I mean, as a fab pickup, he's much more appealing because you kind of have your team set, and that's what he was this year. If you're planning to draft someone with no power like that, at least Arraez could touch double digits. I don't think Edwards, I mean, there's always a chance he can. He's pretty young, but I don't think he's shown it in the minors really. And this is definitely a tough pick. Like, he's going even higher than Arraez is, Edwards. And I just don't want to, because of the average and the runs and the steals, Steamer likes him, but the hole in power is so tough to overcome if you're not way ahead of the curve and with your power numbers. And I guess if you have Schwarber and some other massive homer guys who are projected for massive homer totals, then it makes sense. But it's I always like the analogy. It's like the break glass in case of fire player. But so in the right team, again, he has value, Edwards. It's just I don't want to be planning to have him on my team if I can help it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a big Edwards fan. I enjoyed his production last year in many ways, DCs, Fab Leagues. Loved it a lot. The bump at ADP obviously is less than ideal, considering what I just said about Luis Arraez. The way I build teams, it's going to be difficult for me to get to Xavier Edwards. But I get it. Like you said, you can win with these formulas. It's just I go with the more balanced approach because if one injury doesn't crush you as much, but like even if it's your power guy or if it's Edwards, you're counting on a certain stat. At the same time, if they stay healthy, you can crush. Like you said, if you say you went and got like an Austin Riley and a Kyle Schwarber, you could go and get a Xavier Edwards and be a lot happier about life when all things are said and done if they play the entire season for you. So, yeah, I get it. I get it in a big way. And we're already starting to see Steamer does like batting average. That might be a thing to look at out the gate. All right, my next one is a guy that I have enjoyed value on in last season, and I'm kind of interested once again this year, is Nolan Schanuel of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Nothing flashy at all with Schanuel. Coming off a season, 13 homers, 10 steals, 250 average. I actually thought the average would be higher because of the hit tool we saw in the minors, and even in 29 games in 2023, hit 275. So I was pretty optimistic there, but even with the kind of fallback, Steamer does like Schanuel. He's the 129th hitter, according to Steamer, and he's the 180th hitter, according to ADP, with an ADP of 299 in the 20 DCs that have gone on so far. Schanuel's got a projection of 258, 16 homers, which would be a career high, 8 stolen bases, two less than last year, but runs and RBIs, pretty respectable, up a bit from the previous season. I think they're hoping the Angels will be better. He's also doing this in 11 fewer games, so take that with whatever grain of salt you want to. It still showcases great walking and strikeout rates, a good plate discipline, which was one of his fortes, his contact skills, his plate discipline. Similar to the guys we mentioned, not the biggest quality of contact guy, 3.5% barrel last year, 25.3% hard hit. That doesn't scream massive production, but it's a guy that we've seen at least 10.1% home run to fly ball. It doesn't hit a lot of fly balls, but he seems to make it matter when he does type situation, which is a plus. And one thing I really love about Schanuel, which is why I still don't kind of give up on the guy yet, he's going to be 23 this year. He's insanely young. He basically came to the bigs right after he was drafted. So, excuse me. So I am very, very interested in a guy like Nolan Schanuel. I like Vaughn more because of the power situation we talked about, but you're also getting Schanuel a few picks later. They're going pretty close to each other, though. So it's kind of like, if you want more, I think, stable batting average tools with maybe a few more steals, Schanuel. You want more stable power, you got Vaughn. Weirdly enough, the Angels might have a better lineup than the White Sox, so take that with whatever grain of salt you want there. But to go with Vaughn, I put them together. 2 later round first base corner infielders that I think Steamer likes, and I'm kind of on board with them. It's either getting my bias correct, or at least they're kind of penciling it out also that you got a decent floor. And in Schanuel's case, like I said, there's room for upside at his age that maybe things start to click some more. So Nolan Schanuel would be my third.
It's a good pick. Yeah, it's funny that him and Vaughn are going less than a round apart in ADP right now. And you described them perfectly. If you want a little more speed, go with Schanuel. And then if you want a little more power, then you take Vaughn. Ironically enough, Schanuel only has a 24th percentile sprint speed, but like Goldschmidt and others have shown, if you're smart enough, you can steal bases. You can do double steals, or if someone's sleeping out on the mound, you can take advantage of it. And maybe Schanuel is smart enough to do that. Yeah, the barrel rate's a little concerning. You mentioned that earlier, kind of on par with Edwards and Arraez, slightly higher. So it's not encouraging when you're talking about a first baseman. But yeah, Steamer definitely likes the volume that they're projecting for Schanuel. 74 runs, 65 RBI at pick 300 is very good, and the average that won't hurt you. So I'm on board with Schanuel. I could see him. I'm not sure who I'll have ahead of each other in my rankings when I get to that point between him and Vaughn, but it could be one DC take Schanuel, next DC take Vaughn type deal. And if I need a little more speed, then like I said before, go Schanuel. But yeah, I think him and Vaughn, it's interesting to see how they're not even in the Steamer projections. They're only off by a handful of places. And at that point, as the farther you go down the list, the differences amongst players are very small. So Steamer is kind of like a toss up, and so is ADP. It's a good pick. And I agree that he's well, I will say though, one thing that kind of hurts Schanuel is that the Angels could be much better their lineup if Trout's healthy and he sticks around all year. But Schanuel got some value hitting leadoff last year a little bit. He probably won't with everybody there. He'll probably hit 6, so maybe more RBIs, fewer runs, but just take that into account when you're doing your evaluations.
Good call on that one. Like that quite a bit. Let's talk about a guy that I don't know if the projections account for a change in scenery in left field. So what do you got on your next one?
Yes, I chose Mr. Ryan Mountcastle. He's been kind of talked about recently because of the change to the Baltimore wall, and I figured, okay, let's take a look. Who also hurt Mountcastle too is he lost some playing time, I think, this past season because the Orioles were so loaded. He only had 504 plate appearances. I don't know if he was hurt at all, but sometimes he gets platooned for, I think. But I mean, the power has been there in the past, at least. In 2023, Mountcastle had a 12% barrel rate. This year, it dropped to 8.8, but his hard hit was still 45%. And excellent expected stacks. He had a 275 XBA, a 455 X slug, and a 335 X WOBA. And that amounts to a projection. Let me get Ryan pulled up. That's not how you spell Mountcastle. This is my thought moment. Oh, he's right next. He's right there. Mountcastle, 21 homers, 76 RBIs, 258. Same average as Schanuel. He's right in between Vaughn and Schanuel. But the interesting part with Mountcastle is how the park change will affect him. Because if anyone hasn't heard, or Camden Yards is having their left field wall moved in to kind of correct what they did wrong. It varies in the different spots. I don't know. Well, it stinks. So after having X homers of 27 2 years in a row, 2021, 2022, Mountcastle's X homers on StatCast dropped to 18.5, 16.5. I'm sure that's accounting for the wall, though. So maybe because he had 13 last year, if he played in Stadium, he would have had 20. If he played in Cincinnati, he would have had 25, LA 19. So I think a lot of the parks, when StatCast does this adjustment, it likes his power to play up, and I have confidence that if he can get that barrel rate north of 10 again, with hopefully consistent playing time all the time, Mountcastle could be a 25 homer guy potentially. And if he's hitting in the heart of the lineup for the Orioles, or at least 7th, 6th, he won't be 3rd or 4th probably, but maybe 5th, he could have a good RBI total. And at pick 301, honestly, I probably would take Mountcastle over Vaughn and Schanuel, and he's going 3rd behind. They're all like in a 10 pick range, is kind of crazy, but I would probably prefer Mountcastle over the other two, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a big Mountcastle fan. He was banged up last year at times. I think he's had 1 stint, maybe 2 on the IL. And it's been proven, like you said, the old ballpark just destroyed him there. So you might have to just kind of manually say, okay, I'm giving him like at least like 3 more home runs, maybe more, and see where that goes, which gives you more RBIs and whatnot. So it is interesting because the projection for the batting average is down compared to the previous 2 seasons of 270, 271. But I think that power is going to jump in a big, big way. So I do like some Ryan Mountcastle. I'm with you on that one. He was also platooning with Ryan O'Hearn at times. Looks like that platoon, at least for now, not a thing. It looks like it's Mountcastle's gig again for now. So that's another plus. If he starts platooning, that'll obviously cut into things a little bit. But I do like some Ryan Mountcastle action there this season. Michael C. in the chat says Mountcastle stopped pulling the ball in the air, especially in the second half. I don't know if he was banged up, and looks at it would be notable. I'm pretty sure I may be speaking out of school, but I'm pretty sure he was banged up. All right, my next one. Well, this name was brought to my attention at First Pitch Arizona, and it made a lot of sense the more I started thinking about it. And then he shows up on this list, and that's Pavin Smith. He's the 199th hitter, according to Steamer. According to ADP, he's a 246th hitter, ADP around 420, which to me already gets me intrigued because we're talking 420. We're talking almost around 26, 27 when we start talking Pavin Smith. Again, not a sexy name. But things have changed in Arizona. It looks like Christian Walker is not coming back. There is openings in the outfield. They're already talking about making more trades to get rid of some outfielders. So playing time is potentially a lot more viable than it once was with Pavin Smith. He would DH, play first base, play outfield, but only in a platoon role. Strong side, nonetheless. But we saw 9 homers in 60 games last year, 270 average. Steamer has him playing 123 games, which is double last year, which is a plus. Could be more, again, if he plays first base. That could be huge. 16 homers, 249 average, so a dip in batting average because 270, I think, was a bit crazy. But the power is legit to me when it comes to Pavin Smith. So the 16 homers could end up being more. We saw a 14.7% barrel rate last year, which prior to that, 9.9% was his highest. So it's either a big bump and he'll regress a bit, or this is the new guy. 44% hard hit. We've seen 3 seasons out of the last 4, or at least 40% hard hit rate. Like his ex batting average was 294 and he hit 270. And I was saying that's crazy. There's to me a lot to like with Pavin Smith. He had 16 barrels to go with his 9 home runs. That's kind of in line with what we talk about of home run to barrel rates when it comes to hitters as well. So this is a guy that does have some legit pop. He had that 3 home run game that everyone's going to remember last year. But to me, it was always playing time with Pavin Smith. And now if you can get playing time with the first base outfield eligibility with a guy like Pavin Smith, he jumps over guys like Nolan Schanuel for me. He's probably closer to a Andrew Vaughn, maybe a 1A to Andrew Vaughn's 1B. Still like Mountcastle in the group, but we're also talking 120 picks later, which is pretty darn awesome. So Pavin Smith's a guy that at least was on my radar. And then when we look at this and see that Steamer even agrees he's better than the current ADP, give or take. Now, Steamer can't always be right. I'm just saying, looking at this exercise, Pavin Smith stood out in a big way to me.
Yeah, this is a good call by you. So I'm looking at Pavin Smith's StatCast page, and had he qualified, he'd have a very high percentiles in most hitting, almost every hitting stat. He's above average in everything in that batting section of Baseball Savant. Just that doesn't have enough plate appearances to qualify, but it's not his fault really. He's 28, so he's kind of in his prime. And he did have that big year in 2021 where he played 145 games. Didn't have a lot of power, only 11 homers. He almost totaled that in 60 games this past season. But if the underlying skills can stick, I mean, this could be a gem at that ADP, like you were saying. The one thing, though, is at this ADP, it's kind of accounted for, but Roster Resource has Smith as the full-time first baseman, and he's historically been in a platoon. And in fact, based on the number of plate appearances he had last year versus righties out of his total plate appearance total, which he faced righties 85% of the time, league average is 73. So that puts Pavin Smith in a platoon for last year for sure. Looking at the bench, though, for the D-backs, you were talking about them clearing out outfielders. The only name I could really see who would platoon with them right now is probably Blaze Alexander, but he's a middle infielder. I don't even know who Tim Tawa is or Jorge Barroza.
There's some holes to be had if they don't make a lot of changes pretty soon.
Right, yeah. And this is also one of those things, too, where you wait and see what happens in free agency because everyone's waiting for Soto to sign, it seems like. Yeah. So you'll see what moves are made by the D-backs, and maybe Smith loses this projected playing time. But as of now, it seems like a pretty good dart throw at that ADP. And his projection, where did he go here? Oh, yeah. So Steamer has him for 443 at-bats. That's probably fair for a full-time platoon. So maybe he's a lighter version of Jock. Jock was pretty highly coveted, at least by me, in 15-teamers. So if things stand put, I think I'd be interested in Pavin Smith.
Yeah, and it's one of those that, like, if, say, come February, they still haven't made moves, you're not getting them at 420. I'll tell you that much. Like, that'll start creeping up here. A couple things in the chat here. Michael C. says, guys, Pavin Smith is supposed to be kept quiet. Please and thank you. Sorry. Not sorry. PJ says, I wonder if we see Lawler at third base and they move Suarez to first. That's squeezing Smith. Not sure if Suarez could play. This is the one thing I have agreed with in thinking. They want Lawler to play. And he's probably not taking Perdomo out of the way because Perdomo's got elite Gold Glove defense. So that's one thing. What I could see happening is I could see Lawler playing third, Suarez being more of a DH is kind of how I see things. I know when I talked to Chris Clegg, and that show comes out next week, that Adrian Del Castillo they could see potentially DHing at some time. So Suarez and Del Castillo could platoon at DH, and then Suarez could find his way to first or third. So there is a world, to his question, yes, where Suarez could play some first base. That's not out of the question. Well, let's be honest, Ben. Is there a world where Suarez returns back to the guy we all thought he was at one point in time before he took the world by storm last year, and he's not even in the question for anything?
I mean, there's definitely the chance. I did see someone point out, though, I forget where it was, that Suarez could have been masked by Seattle's ballpark, because I think those 2 years were kind of like what I thought was the decline for him. I mean, he went from playing in Cincinnati to Seattle. It's almost as extreme as you can get. Yeah. But bringing up Suarez again, that wound was closing for me, Bubba, and now it's ripping back open again. But
I hate to break it to you, we're going to talk about him later in the show too.
Oh, I'm well aware. I saw that name down there.
But yeah, so I agree. There's definitely the platoon situation with Smith, but with Smith, he could also, when Suarez goes to first base, Smith can go to the outfield. Like, there's so many avenues if Smith's producing to do that. He is probably better meant to platoon, like you mentioned. So a lot of moving pieces, but ADP 420, enticing, to say the least. All right, who's next on your list? Because this is a guy I never draft, and you laugh at me a lot of the time, and then I laugh back.
Yeah, I picked Yandy Diaz, so another one of what I'm considering the average anchors, and that's because he is Steamer's 53rd projected hitter right now versus ADP of 232, which makes him the 138th hitter off the board in DCs. And kind of like with Lee and Xavier Edwards, Diaz's projection is anchored by his runs. He's projected for 94 and a 286 average, which are a significant portion of his total value. 19 homers is pretty solid for those totals. 68 RBI isn't bad. He normally hits leadoff, so you're not going to expect a lot of RBIs for a leadoff hitter, unless you're Ohtani, which is 1 in a million. Right now, Rush Resource has Yandy batting leadoff again, which is good for his runs prospects. But the one thing, though, that I think everyone was getting high on Yandy about was the power that they thought was happening after 2022, 2023. I forget which year it was, but he kind of broke out with the barrel rate. And this year, it went down to 7.6% after being 9.5 in 2023. So went from average to below average. Yandy's hard hit was still excellent, 48%, but his ground ball rate was over 50%, almost 55%, and that's going to kill you. So he's reverted back to the Yandy that everyone was used to and was hoping he would break free from. But I think this is one where Steamer is very high on Yandy, but I think they're too high. I wouldn't buy into this projection for him because the 20 homers. So I want to see how many barrels. So last year he had 36 barrels. So that would kind of account for 18. If you go off Ryan's back of the envelope math, 50% roughly. He had 41 in 2023. Actually, the last 2 years were Yandy's career highs in barrels. But also too, like there's news now that I think you saw it, but the Rays are having a very weird schedule now because of the hurricane damage to Tropicana Field. They're playing like almost the first 2 months of the year. They're almost exclusively at home at George Steinbrenner Field, which is where the Yankees single A team plays, and it's identical Yankee Stadium essentially. But then in the summer, they're going to be on the road like 2/3 of the time. So that kind of concerns me. I mean, it's going to be hard for all the Rays players, and for that, I'm kind of cautious about wanting to take many Rays. I did add a Ray myself. Well, actually, I added 2 Rays now that I think about it because they're intriguing, but I'm kind of down on Yandy. That ground ball rate is very extreme, and he's going to be 33 now, and I just think that's who he is, and he could help your average, but he's not very fast, so he has to get those ground balls through the holes, and I don't want to bank on that really.
Yeah, that's my problem. I'm not banking on that as well. PJ's got a fun comment about left field in the new ballpark could benefit Yandy, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, he's a guy I can just never figure out when he goes off. I tip my cap, but then the other times I step away and I just kind of I don't know suffer the consequences are correct or not, but I avoid them, and it's one of my pros and cons, I guess. All right, next one for me. This one's for you, Uncle Ted. Pete Crow Armstrong. Big fan of what we saw to finish out the season for Pete Crow. He had 10 homers and 27 steals in 123 games with the Cubs last year. Hit 237, so the averages could be better. But when you look at Pete Crow's second half at 262 compared to 203 in the first half, if you just look at the last 2 months, August he hit 314, September hit 256. I'll take 256 for the way he damages the baseball. 32 runs scored, 27 RBI, 7 homers, and 7 stolen bases in those 2 months. So I really like what we saw from Pete there. And when you look at Steamer is not as big of a fan, though. This is where I start flipping the script on this one a bit. Steamer has PCA as the 159th hitter, projected for a 243 average, 13 homers, 24 stolen bases, so fewer stolen bases than he did this past season. They have PCA played 126 games, so nearly the same amount of games, have them at 81 more plate appearances than last season, so they're giving them a boost, yet fewer steals, a little more pop, which is interesting. And I mentioned 159th hitter, according to Steamer. According to ADP, he's the 79th hitter, ADP of a close to 140. So you have to pay the piper for Pete Crow, and this is where I've had trouble on draft day looking at the profile. Again, 23 years old, a lot can change here. But do I want to draft a guy projected for 14 homers, 25 steals, and a 243 average as a top 150 pick? That becomes tricky. We're talking round 9, round 10. When you're looking at Pete Crow Armstrong, a guy that had 7.4% barrels good, 37% hard hit rate, not horrible, not ideal, obviously. A lot of fly balls for a guy with his speed. I expect him to go on the ground more. It's only 43%, but would expect more from Pete Crow. But what I'm trying to say, Steamer is not as optimistic as I know a lot of other people are. Let's put it that way. I do like the skill set a lot. I'm not going to purposely avoid Pete Crow Armstrong. I think there's a good floor of like we could get a 15-30 guy here, like a Andres Jimenez type. But it's the outfield, all things considered, and outfield does get pushed up a bit early on in these drafts. So this is one of the first ones where Steamer is not as big a fan as the early drafting when it comes to Pete Crow Armstrong.
I kind of agree that he's probably going a little too high. His ADP of 139 is the top of my head. Kind of reminds me of the range that Jarren Duran was going last year. And we'll look at what Duran did if we're talking about him eventually too. But Duran had much better underlying numbers than Pete Crow Armstrong did this past year. The XBA, the X-Slug, X-Woba were all pretty awful. I mean, granted, you want him to be there for the speed, but you also want him to be a good player. And his defense will keep him in the lineup, don't get me wrong. So playing time's probably safe. But he chases a lot. His O-swing was 43%, which is, I think I mentioned that last week or the week before. That's a very bad rate, almost getting close to half the time he's swinging outside the zone. Doesn't walk a whole lot. And when someone's that fast, you kind of want them to walk. He only has a 5% walk rate last year. Granted, he was a rookie, and he's only 22 right now. He's going to be 23 next season. And so I checked the platoon splits on him. He faced righties 77% of the time, which by my estimation on the research I did the other day is kind of it's at the edge of a full-time player. I view 68% to 80% based on the numbers that I saw as a everyday player. So he's on the high edge. I know he did platoon at times, but then after I dropped him, of course, the Cubs did let him play full-time last year. That's how those things work. But he's actually next. Go figure. He's actually next to Yandy Diaz in that percentage. So I think he'll be a full-time player for that defense, like I mentioned. But at that ADP, it's asking a lot. Also, he's projected to hit low in the lineup. Roster Resource has a PCA at 8th in the lineup, and if I'm taking him in the top 10 rounds, I want him batting leadoff or second. And granted, like the speed is there, but maybe I'd rather wait because I don't know if the power will be there necessarily for PCA. His barrel rate wasn't awful, only 7%, which is slightly below average. But also, too, I mean, the Steamer projection is going to be low because he is a rookie, and
that's a big part right there.
Yes, but this is why I look at projections last because I want to do like this deep diving that we're doing right now. And so far, whenever I go to do my rankings finally, I probably won't have him too high, and I'll probably be out on PCA at this ADP. But it's I know he has the tools, like he could steal 40 bases, but it's you're really paying for that to hit, and I don't know if he's ready to get there yet.
Yeah, a couple things on this one. Michael C in the chat says he does that in every draft. He goes early, but what are runs and RBIs when you're batting, 8th or 9th? That is very true. That's counting stats. Runs maybe okay. RBIs are going to be tricky. The other thing I want to mention, so kind of about where he's going of late, other outfielders going right above him, Jason Dominguez. You have Dylan Cruz right behind him. You have Ian Happ, Adolis Garcia. So it's kind of funny the Dominguez Cruz going right before him. I see a lot of Spider-Man gifts potentially in that situation when it comes to him. So it seems like a pocket of young players. Let's take a chance for some power and speed, and hopefully they kind of take that next step potentially. And some people like to take those risks, some don't. And at least with it comes to like Dominguez, Cruz. I actually took Cruz, I think, in the Gladiator, and PCA. I was like, I can see at least taking a chance if you want to. Just know it's a risky reward type play, but at least it's like round 9 or 10. That'd be my 2 cents on that. All right, who's your next one, Ben?
Yeah, look at that. I actually just mentioned him, and that is Mr. Jarren Duran.
There you go.
Yep, his ADP right now is 22 overall, 22.4, which is the 19th hitter. But per Steamer, Duran is the 29th projected hitter. So the 10 spot difference. You look at his projection, 97 runs, which is great. So that's top 2 round worthy. 19 homers, which is fine. 71 RBI, 31 steals, and the average is, I think, where a lot of the value is getting taken away, 262. Duran, everything that we saw last year, because I know we covered Duran at least once already, it pointed to him earning his average. I think his XBA was relatively high. Let me pull that up real quick. Duran had a 280 XBA, so 20 points higher than what Steamer has him projected for. He increased his barrel rate pretty nicely, I believe. Where do I find Duran? Yeah, so in 2023, Duran had a 5.3% barrel rate, which is pretty poor. That went up to 9.1. His hard hit was roughly the same. His XBA jumped 20 points. He hit the ball harder by about a mile per hour, 90.8 average X velocity for Duran. Still a lot of ground balls though this year, 46%, but he's so fast that it helps with him running out base hits. Doesn't strike out a lot. He actually cut his K rate 3% to 21.8 this past season, so that looks good. And I remember saying too when Duran was going in this, I think we talked about, actually it was the meatball draft and how high Duran went. Like his value was built a lot on 111 runs. It's hard you can't really project that. He also has a bad lefty splits. So I don't think Duran's going to sit versus lefties or anything. It'll just hurt his performance, I think. Your dog agrees, I think, hopefully. But it's Duran's definitely a first, like an early round pick. I just don't know if maybe it's supposed to be more towards the end of the second and 15s, early third. I just think that there's a little bit of risk with not getting your money, your value back on Duran if you take him too early, but just something to think about. I think is maybe he might be getting overdrafted a tad, but it's not a whole lot. But at this point in the draft, 10 spots is a lot when you're at the top of the draft, like with Vaughn and Mountcastle when they're 10 apart. It's a lot different when they're pick 300, but in the first two rounds, the difference means there's a lot bigger difference in those as the picks go down. I don't know if I explained that pretty well, but the differences are bigger in the early rounds than they are later, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I heard James Anderson kind of have a similar conversation before when we talk about, okay, batting average, everyone gets a big batting average early, so get one early, but as things drop down in rounds, the same thing with different stats, like you're saying, talent pool, whatever, things, they might have similar players in this area, but the drop-offs are obviously a big difference. So I get what you're saying. And a big deal. And so did my dog, apparently. Big fan of Jaron Duran. So I love when people knock on the door after 5 o'clock. It's always fun. But yeah, so we got that going. Tom DeCola in the chat says, I'd worry if Soto were there. Steals may be down. Well, we can't worry about that till it happens. Soto's go back to Ben's team for all we know. So we got that going as well. But yeah, Duran's very interesting. Duran proved himself pretty well in the first go around, and I'm with you on that projection. I think I saw it. So I was looking at it earlier, and I don't agree. I think he's better than the projection. Let's put it that way. I'm with you. All right. I got another negative Nancy here to discuss, and this is one that I took in round 3 of the meatball draft. Now he fell like crazy in the gladiator draft the other night with me and Ryan. ADP is closing in on 100. He's over the 20 drafts, it's 88. 4-1 Royce Lewis. He's the 48th hitter off the board. Steamer has him at 100. That's where I got the 100 number. So Steamer does not like Royce Lewis as much as everybody else, like in a big, big way. Again, 48th hitter, ADP 87, 88. Royce Lewis at 100. When you look at the projection from Royce Lewis, 134 games, most he's ever played is 82. It's a grain of salt already. 26 home runs. Hit 16 last year, 15 the year before. 69 runs, 76 RBIs, 5 steals, 252 average. Like we saw him hit 233 last year when things went off the edge. So boosting him back up to 252, it's almost in between his 2 seasons we've seen. The weird one for me is looking at the runs and RBIs. If like he hits 26 home runs, I think I'd expect more runs and RBIs, but maybe not. Maybe they're just downplaying the whole Minnesota team as a whole. But they're very, very bleak when it comes to Royce's projections. Now, I get the injury history is very concerning, but back-to-back seasons with a barrel percentage above 11. The hard hit rate dropped last year to 37%, just like his batting average dropped. We know he was injured. Shocker. Once again, like his XBA was 248 compared to his 233 batting average, which is a plus in one positive way to look at things. just a guy that we know he's not going to hit a grand slam every time he's up, like we saw a couple years ago with Royce Lewis. But at the same time, if he could play, and that's a humongous if, hope he might be Byron Buxton 2.0, unfortunately. But he's still super young, so hopefully he can get this fixed. Again, there are obliques and groins with him, which I don't like soft tissue injuries to begin with. But it's a guy that they're very down on, when in my mind, if you're drafting for upside, he's one of the more elite third basemen in the game. There's still a handful ahead of him. I'm not saying he's the most elite third baseman, but I think he's a lot better than, hitter 100 per se, as Steamer says. I agree the concerns they have, but if you're drafting him, you need to have more optimism. If you're not drafting him, you agree with Steamers, the way I'm going to put that. And I understand both sides. It's a sketchy pick, but when you're paying a premium, it was sketchier. Where he's at now, there's kind of juice might be worth the squeeze situation. So what's your thoughts on Royce Lewis?
Well, I wanted to get a gauge on what hitter 100 is in ADP, and that's 170, and that's Ceddanne Rafaela. And I think that's a little too extreme for where Steamer has Lewis. Rafaela is actually, for what it's worth, is projected behind Lewis in value per the Steamer projections. But yeah, the average is really driving down his projection, and also the runs. You'd think someone like Lewis who hits the ball so well, or should at least, would be projected for more. And that made me look at his projected lineup position on Roster Resource. They have him at 6th right now, which is kind of alarming. They have Willie Castro, Carlos Correa, Trevor Larnach, Buxton, our boy Matt Wallner 5th, and then Lewis 6th. Assuming everything's going right, I'd bet that Lewis is probably top 3, top 4 most of the season if he's healthy and playing like he should be. So I don't know if I'm in on the ADP because of the injury history with Lewis, but I think Steamer's a little harsh at the same time. So I'm kind of like in the middle with where I feel like he should be going. The one positive really is that his barrel rate didn't drop. It's like the one thing that didn't drop from 2023. It was 11.7 in 2023, 11.2% this past season. The K rate was roughly the same. The walk rate was the same. The batted ball profile, ground ball, fly ball is roughly the same. The exit velocity did drop a ton though, 3 miles per hour on average. Maybe the injury played into that, but you can't really write it off because he's always injured.
Exactly. That's the problem.
Yeah. So I still think when you took him in the DC, it's okay because you have your bench depth to supplement when he's injured. But when we get to drafts or fab season drafts and you have NFBC size benches and there's no IL, it's going to be hard to pick Lewis if he's going inside the top 100, I think.
And in Gladiators, he's terrifying because
for sure,
that's your 1/3 baseman. Like have no, like I remember I told everybody when I took him in the DC, I immediately took like Bregman like 2 rounds later because he's boring, but knock on wood, he plays the whole season. So if worse comes to worse, Bregman's my 3rd baseman or a corner infielder if Lewis is healthy. I'll take my chances. Like you said, you have depth at these positions where in fab leagues, you're spending a premium pick type thing, and in Gladiators, you're really rolling some dice for sure. All right, who's your next one? Because this is one that was a crowd favorite at one point last year, and then people forgot about him once again.
I picked Mr. Joe Adell of the Angels. He right now he's Steamer's 196th hitter versus ADP of 282 on average, which makes him hitter 171. So Steamer's saying he is actually getting slightly overdrafted. But the one thing that really stood out to me when I looked at his projection is that they only have him for 387 at-bats, less than 400, which is kind of low considering the team he's on and his pedigree. But in those 387 at-bats, Steamer has him for 20 homers, 14 steals, 52 runs, 55 RBI. So if you get that up to 500 at-bats, maybe he's like a 25-20 almost projection. And the average will hurt you, of course. He's had issues with strikeouts, Adell has. But I think at that point in the draft, especially in a fab league, I think it's all upside. So, I mean, I'm about to get into DC seasons like in a month or so, but I don't know if I'll be taking Adell there. Maybe on like team or two, I would try to roll the dice. His barrel rate was actually better than Royce Lewis's last year. His hard hit was better. K rate was 27.9% for Adell, which isn't very good. I mean, at least it's not 30. I remember when we talked about him at one point, Adele, he had a very bad platoon split versus righties. He crushes lefties, and he needs to definitely fix that if he wants to stick at the major league level. Also, what hurts is that he's projected to bat ninth per roster resource. But, I mean, the tools are all there. He's only 25 still. People thought he was breaking out in April last year. But, I mean, his BABIP also was 240. Oh, this is why we talked about it. His BABIP was 244. And he's very fast, hits the ball pretty hard. So I think he has a lot of upside where he's going. And he could be a pick like Brennan Doyle almost. Same kind of profile, bad K rate, but the power and the speed, and hopefully gets full playing time this upcoming year and kind of everything clicks for him.
Yeah, I'm very interested in Adele once again. We saw such a good glimpse there that at least optimism, I should say. But we also saw a lot of bad. One thing you mentioned, I was hoping you would mention, is something we just talked about last year, is that platoon split's real with him. And that could be a blessing or a curse in fantasy, depending on how you can set your roster, let's say. Like, I'm much more inclined to look at platoon guys potentially like a DC where you want a deep bench and you can play the matchups more often type thing. And maybe that makes them stay healthier longer also, potentially. And then there's also the hope that, Adele's once former, high-end prospect, more playing time, starts figuring things out. Like you said, like the underlying metrics still look pretty promising in certain aspects of it with Joe Adele. So at the ADP, I don't see a reason to get too turned off by Adele. That seems like the time to start taking some chances on these guys because, we talked about all those first basemen going around right around there, but like Matt Wallner is another outfielder. He's a platoon on the strong side. JJ Bleday is going a little bit ahead of him. I could see the arguments for taking both. Also, I could see, hey, let's roll the dice on Adele in the same situations. Those are the main outfielders. Evan Carter going a little later. I'd probably actually take a chance on Adele, all things considered, in those scenarios. So ADP matters. And then when you look under the hood, like we're doing tonight, it helps make some decisions, or at least prepare to make some decisions. So Adele's still very intriguing, to say the least. All right, my next one here, Parker Meadows. This is a dude that just crushed fantasy spirits in 2023. Just destroyed them. Then he ended up spending most of the season in the minors. This year, spent time in the minors, gets called, starts producing really well in the minors, gets called up, boom, blows out his hammy, misses time. Then comes back, though, and honestly, I was surprised to see the 244 batting average. I thought that was, not lower on the season. 9 homers, 9 steals, all things considered with Parker Meadows. But if you look at the splits, because he had that rough start, dude hit 273 in September, 322 in August. So let's just say the second half where he hit 296 with 6 of his 9 home runs and 5 of his stolen bases, very promising. And that's where I see Parker Meadows, and I'm like, I look at the steamer here. They have Parker Meadows as the 146th ranked hitter, where according to ADP, he's the 95th ranked hitter. His ADP is close to 166. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I can see where 166 might leave like a sour taste in people's mouth when that's pretty high. You got some elite guys going around him. But let's not forget who Parker Meadows is. Like, you look at his projection here, and Parker Meadows should be leading off for a very good Tigers team. He's projected for 16 homers, 22 steals. I still think the 237 average does not do him justice. I think that's what's crushing his steamer ranking in a big way. And I don't think that's fair. Like, you don't have to make him a 300 hitter. I get it. But why can't he be 265, 270? Like, why can't that be in the realm of reality with Meadows? Again, he's 25, so it's a young player. Issues making rankings with young players, especially because he hasn't done it at the big league levels. Like, 237 might be in line with his big league numbers compared to what we've seen. So that part, I guess, could be your argument for the steamer projections. That's where we can, finagle things a bit, because barrel rate 7.1%, 31% hard hit, not like the most ideal situation, but dude, it's a lot of fly balls. Might want to adjust that in Comerica, but he also has an OBP, at least, well over 300 throughout the minors. And if that can carry over, score a bunch of runs, have a potential 2020 type upside, I think there's a lot to like with Parker Meadows, especially with the improvements on that Detroit Tigers team. And this is one of the projections I think Steamer is bullishly low on. I think there's very, very much a lot to like with Parker Meadows, and this one stood out in a big way to me.
Right, yeah. His average definitely brings him into the negative total Z-score value. 235 at that volume is going to hurt a lot. 527 at bats is the projection total. And yeah, I think everyone is just seeing that 2-month sample at the end of the season where he hit 322 in August, 273 in September with 6 homers, 5 steals. So that's like an 18-15 pace. And they're just imagining dollar signs because, yes, if you look at the season as a whole, Parker was kind of going towards pick 200 as main events were rolling around and all drafts were kind of underway. But and that his ADP was roughly in the late 200s, I think, in draft and holds last year at this time. So he's going up like 100 picks just because of that 2-month sample, which is doing a lot of projecting on NFBC drafters' parts. But like you broke it down, it makes sense why everyone's so excited for him. He could be a 25-25 player potentially. I don't know, like 17-25 at the worst is probably a more fair projection. He is projected for, like you said, 16-20. So the steals are probably a little bit low. I did pull up. I think there was some concern with him being a platoon bat, but he's 79.
Well, real quick, guys, I want to throw this here. Jeff Johnson in the chat says, as a diehard Tiger fan, I love Meadows. Not that this matters for fantasy, but I've been watching baseball for 40 years. He's the best defensive outfielder I've seen, and I think defense might change the platoon. But sorry, I interrupted you. You actually have numbers to support this.
No, that's a good point though, because it's kind of like the PCA argument is that so Parker Meadows, 79% of his plate appearances last year were versus righties, and that's right at the cusp that I've kind of established as 80% is kind of like on the borderline of platoon bat versus full time. But if his defense is that good, and I trust the Tigers fan who watches the games that okay, he's going to be the leadoff hitter, he's going to bat, he's going to play every day, and maybe if he faces lefty, he goes down to the 8th or 9th in the lineup, which will kind of hurt a little bit, but at least he's still in the lineup. Who knows if that's going to happen? Well, I mean, the Tigers have plenty of guys. They've always been cycling players in and out of the lineups the last couple of years. So I get it. I mean, the 166 is kind of rich, though, because you're really projecting him to be that player, and we've only seen it for 46 games.
That's the tricky part, yeah. So
I don't know. I'd probably pass on him at that ADP, depending on what the player pool looks like when I get to that point. But I do get the appeal of taking him. It's just if he was post pick 200, I'd be much more interested in drafting him, I'm sure.
And just like one of the fun things I always love doing in these times of years as we're doing draft prep and trying to figure things out and trying to find quote unquote value and all that fun stuff is I love ADP debates, like player going here compared to a guy going later stuff. And one that's fun, like Meadows, I don't ever see being the batting average asset. Like I think it should be higher, but he's not a 280 to 300 guy. But in reality, if we take batting average aside, which I get you, is still a roto category. If we look at power, speed, runs, and RBIs, Michael Harris is going to pick 44. Parker Meadows is going to pick 165. Like for the drop in batting average, is the 120 pick difference pretty valuable? I think there's something. It's a conversation. I'm not saying it's BL, but that's the kind of stuff I look at. For as much as people love Michael Harris, who still hasn't done it either, why are we? He's done it more. Okay, I'm not gonna say he hasn't done it more so, but why are we anointing him and ignoring like the Parker Meadows and even PCO throw in the mix just for fun? I get the PCA part, but Parker Meadows has it. That's the thing. So just a little thing to leave the listeners with on that one, something to think about. All right, you got a fun one here. I'm really curious what you have to say about your next one.
He kind of falls in the same boat as Meadows, except for he's more established, and that's Dalton Varsho. He is Steamer's 111th projected hitter. His current ADP is even past the first baseman we were talking about earlier. Varsho's ADP is 309.3, which makes him hitter 184. So that's a 73 spot difference between Steamer's projection and ADP. Varsho's projection is fueled by 80 runs, 24 homers, 77 RBIs, 15 steals, and that's all despite a 223 average, which was actually worse than Meadows. If Varsho could hit the ball somewhat consistently, he'd be well within the top 75 hitters probably with his projection. I know it was pretty much a disaster for him last year. I did not have Varsho because I didn't like the profile, but the projection definitely caught my attention, and that's why I figured, okay, let's talk about him a little bit. He still projected to bat second for the Blue Jays. He went 18-10 last year with the 214 average, which hurt. See how the underlying numbers look like. So he had this is real bad. A 189 batting average XBA, a 325 X slug, and a 265 X WOBA. So I don't know what Steamer is seeing they're disregarding this season completely. I mean, not completely, but like they're looking at other factors, of course. But the drop in ADP for Varsho makes sense because of how bad he was. The K rate was 26.7%, which is definitely not good. The good walk rate, though, it's just interesting. It was more interesting to see the high projection. It makes you stop and look like we're doing right now. But let me look at how he looked in 2023. Varsho, where is he? I have him here. Oh, yeah. So he had a 232 XBA in 2023, a 391 X slug, much better numbers. The hard hit was 36% in 2023 for Varsho. It was 33.3, so not a big difference. The barrel rate dropped by a percentage point to 6.2%, which isn't very good. He really stopped hitting the ball hard. So he went from almost an 88 average exit velocity to 86.1 mile per hour average exit velocity. And he has a lot of fly balls, Varsho, 52%, and he doesn't have the power to be doing that with that exit velocity and barrel rate. So that's why his XBA was so low. He's just hitting weak fly balls. And I mean, that signals to me that he needs an approach change, but I don't get how you can project that. He had a 47% fly ball rate in 2023, so he was already skewed that way, and he just made it worse without the power to back it up. And if for whatever reason something happened in spring training, he looks better. Maybe that 300 ADP is very appealing, but I think Steamer might be a little too optimistic here for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. Plus, he had shoulder surgery, so I really don't know where the optimism from Steamer comes from, but they are very optimistic when it comes to Dalton Varsho. All right, the moment has come, Ben. If you want to step out of the room,
I gotta go somewhere real quick up here.
But we're going to talk about Eugenio Suarez, and in reality, this might make you feel better. I don't know. When it comes to Steamer, Suarez is the 148th ranked hitter, where ADP has him as the 113th ranked hitter. A nice 35-point differential there. 192 ADP for Eugenio Suarez. And it's just an interesting one to me. He's getting older, coming off the monster year. It's been discussed a million times. Strangely enough, it's not really a monster as a monster like second half, because 30 home runs like is after 22 in Seattle, but then 31, 31, 49, 34. That's who he is, basically. Steamer's got him back to 23 in 143 games. 143 games would be his fewest games since 2018. 23 home runs would be his fewest home runs since 2016. So these are taking some massive hits, 70 runs, 75 RBIs, taking some pretty big drops. The RBI is the lowest RBI since 2016. 236 average, though, that's pretty much in line with things we saw before 2024. So Steamer's definitely taking a step back on Suarez, getting older. I get it, because what we saw in the first half of the season, give or take, was a pretty bad ball player, and he just tore it up late. And Steamer is not just taking all that into consideration. They're not running with that. They're bringing back kind of more of what we saw in 23 with a splash, is what I'll say. But it is a guy that we still saw. The 11.3% barrel rate dropped a lot last year. Again, probably heavily because of the first half. A very good season. We've discussed him plenty on the show. I just wanted to bring up how they are not just rolling with another 30 home run season from Suarez, which we've seen so many times, and they're just dropping them in pretty much all categories that you'd expect. So they're not buying what we saw in the second half, essentially, and they're buying more so, or even less, of what we've seen consistently year after year with Suarez, who, when we always drafted him, we're like, okay, we'll take the batting average hit because maybe we did get an Edwards or an Arraez somewhere, but you're going to give me the 30 home runs, and we're going to move on. Steamer doesn't think you're going to get that either, which is very, very interesting to me, Ben. So wanted to bring that one up because it's a name that everyone has talked about a million times since probably the middle point of last year, but a name that Steamer, they don't care what people have to say, as they're definitely bringing him a peg or two down on this one.
Yeah, and it looks like 2023 was the outlier because he had 31 homers in 21, 31 and 22, and then the 30 you mentioned last year. And I think I drafted Suarez for that upside, though, last year, because he was going, I think, on average about 100 picks later. He was going near the back end of the 200s, and now he's going in the late 100s. I'm actually kind of it's good that the drafters haven't pushed him up too high, because after that 30 homer, 100 year, or close to 100, you could see him going in the early 100s instead of the late 100s. But yeah, like his numbers aren't very different from what they were in 2023, at least underlying numbers. His K rate dropped a few points. That probably explains why the average went up. His XBA jumped a little more than 20 percentage points at XBA of 249. His X slug was 456 this past year, X slug by 332, both pretty good, slightly higher than 2023, but the barrel rate actually went down. The exit velocity went down by a mile per hour. Contact rate jumped a little bit. The O swing went up though as well, about 4 percentage points. The fly ball rate was almost identical. So he was very similar in terms of those numbers, but yeah, I'm over it now, but it's time to let go. But yeah, I think based off of memory, his projection is kind of what it was last year. I'm not going to pull up his 2023 or 2024 projection of the aggregate that I use, but it's probably the same total, and that's why it was appealing. But at this earlier ADP, I think it's hard to bank on another. Like it was probably a career. Well, that 1 year in Cincinnati was his career year, but in his second half of his career, this is like his career year in terms of that portion of his career. And I don't know, it's I'd probably pass on him, not out of spite, but I just don't think I don't think he's worth that draft cost.
Yep, no, I'm with you. It's a tough price to pay for sure. All right, who's your next? Your second Tampa Bay Ray of the night?
Yes, this guy's been talked about a lot recently. That's Johnny DeLuca, and that is a product of the Jose Siri trade. So Jose Siri's now on the Mets, and it seems like DeLuca is the full-time center fielder. When you look at Steamer, though, they haven't. This is before the trade, of course. I pulled this a few weeks ago, so I'm sure it'll update somewhat. But at the time, Steamer had DeLuca as a part-time player, projected for 310 at-bats, which made him hitter 277. He had a 37 runs, 10 homers, 38 RBI, 11 steals, 231 average for his line. But I saw the power and the speed in that low at-bat total, and that kind of intrigued me. So what I did was I prorated his projection for 500 at-bats because I think Roster Resource has DeLuca as the everyday center fielder for the Rays right now. They do. They have him being the center fielder, batting 7th, so not the best spot, but guys could get hurt for them, or they always do weird things with their lineup. Someone could get traded as well. And so when you prorate the 310 at-bat line to 500 at-bats, like the runs go to 60 runs. He gets 16 homers, 61 RBI, and 18 steals. So he's the 16-18 guy with a 230 average. But he's going at ADP of 442 right now, which is a 257th hitter. So he's actually going ahead of what Steamer thinks. But I think that ADP is climbing now because of the trade. But so then I also looked up that stat line with the 60, 16, 61, 18, and it kind of compares to players like Marsh and Geloff for their projections in terms of the average, and then kind of the same ballpark for the counting stats. And they're going much higher in ADP. I don't know how high LaDuca will go, because even he had some issues. I'll pull him up. He had some issues where he had that 1 week where Phil, Toby, I think Rob D, they all added him in the main event. And then like the week after, he stopped playing. It was the weirdest thing. But DeLuca's playing time split was 72% versus right-handed batters. So he was still in that range, but on the lower end of a full-time player. But I remember there were times where he was sitting or only playing versus lefties. The Rays were just doing weird things with their lineup, which is always at risk. But if he stays post pick 300 in DCs, I think he's still a solid pick because I think he has a solid defense, to my knowledge. On one of the pods I was listening to recently, they whoever it was mentioned that the Rays have said he's their guy for center field. And but like he had 217 last year, so you got to make sure that you're not already deficient in average. But the power and the speed are there for DeLuca, and at that late of an ADP, I kind of like the upside.
Yeah, I took him in my DC right now at 373. It's a little earlier, but
nice.
It was right after the news. Like I liked him before. I was on the bandwagon when he got traded from the Dodgers. Pretty pumped on that when they non-tendered Dylan Carlson. I was like, okay, well, and they non-tendered Dylan Carlson and they traded Jose Siri. I'm like, I will take my chances with Johnny. If the Rays find a way to spend money and screw me over, I'll take my chances there because they don't spend money. So I like the odds on that one. All right, an outfielder I'm very excited about this year, and Steamer is not. it's awesome is Garrett Mitchell. Steamer has Garrett Mitchell as the 178th ranked hitter according to Steamer, where ADP has him at 146, so 32 pick delta. 246 roughly ADP for Garrett Mitchell, a guy that over 69 games last year because he was hurt to start the year. He's supposed to start the year with the team, like breaks his hand or something at the end of spring training. Misses a lot of time, comes up 8 homers, 11 steals, 255 average in those games. Near 32% K rate, not ideal. I'll admit that 100%. But again, young ball player, getting his feet wet at the big league level. Steamer has him projected 15 homers, 19 steals in 113 games. 236 average. I would hope for a little more than that. Because at the minor league levels, we saw a guy that was much better plate discipline for one. So that's maybe something he could find. Not a ton of power, but enough with speed and decent batting average. It's the barrel rate dropped last year. The hard hit was 37%, basically in line with 2023. And that small sample, all small samples, 69 games is the biggest sample he's had. So go with that. We saw a near 56% ground ball rate last year. So we'd have to adjust that because throughout the minors, he was like a high 30s, low 40s guy. So to me, it was a player trying to get his feet wet, wasn't playing every day until later in the season because even when he got called up, it felt like he was platooning. We saw more consistent playing time as the season went on. Like in August, he had 75, or he played in 25 games, 22 games in September. So he got some fair run when all things were said and done. 270 in July, 253 in August, September 238 average, but more power in that month. So and more speed. So again, grain of salt with that one. But what I did see with Garrett Mitchell is he kept improving in the power and speed department late. As PJ mentions here, this is one thing I like is Garrett Mitchell is a great later pivot instead of PCA. And I think that's a very, very fun comp when you look at Garrett Mitchell because like we mentioned, Mitchell's ADP going around 240th, and then you got Pete Crow going around 145. So that's a 100-pick differential between Garrett Mitchell and PCA. I like the obviously the best catcher in baseball plays on his team. That'll help drive him in many times in Milwaukee. So I'm a big fan of what we get from Garrett Mitchell, a young ball player that I think in his first full season can really blossom as the center fielder in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I get it. I had Mitchell on a couple teams last year, including my main event that we talked about at the end of the season. He kind of falls into that profile where I'm hesitant to take them too early. Mitchell had 83% of his plate appearances versus righties last year, which is above that platoon threshold that I've kind of unofficially marked. And Rusty Resource has him as a full-time outfielder for the Brewers. Their 2 platoon bats are Sal Frelick and Oliver Dunn, and then the 2 on the bench that would fill in for Frelick and Dunn are Andrew Monasterio and Blake Perkins. Blake Perkins is a center fielder, and he was the one I think that was kind of platooning with Mitchell this year. So that kind of worries me. I mean, they do have Mitchell hitting 4th, so that's good if he is a platoon bat still. I mean, people like Wallner, who ended up breaking out of the platoon, but he was kind of in that range when he was platooning, and Jock would hit 3rd for the D-backs. So it is possible to be a platoon bat and still have value, pretty good value. The other thing, though, with Mitchell, and you mentioned the short sample, the career high for him is 69 games this past year, is his K rate has been north of 31.7%, which was this past season so far in his career. So in 116 career games, Mitchell's K percentage is 34.2%.
Yeah.
And his BABIP is 389, and that's given him a 264 average. Yeah, he's fast, but this is why the Steamer batting average projection is so low, 236. I think you mentioned, I forget if you mentioned his XBA, but it was not good. And that was like 233. So, I mean, also too, he got hit in the hand, and it's hard for a hitter to recover from that kind of injury. It's feel like it's been something every year for Mitchell. So I do like the appeal, but I don't know if I want to trust him as a full-time outfielder at that ADP. And Steamer's kind of backing me up with that. It's just there might be other guys. Like I don't know what the player pool looks like, but if I am taking Mitchell, I'll be surprised at that price. But I just don't know. As it is right now, I probably will be passing on him if he's going that early.
Say in that range where he's going right now, it's a lot of pitchers. Right behind him is Byron Buxton, if that tickles your fancy.
No, I'd rather go Mitchell.
Brendan Donovan, Willie Castro, Brandon Lau, Right ahead of him, Trevor Story, Colt Keith, Lourdes Gurriel. That's the pocket you're in right there.
Yeah, Gurriel's intriguing because he's a full-time,
Yep.
boring outfielder. So I guess if you take Mitchell, you need the speed. So that's a good debate, I think. But yeah, not a lot of names that maybe seem like I want to take them over Mitchell, I think, still. But we'll see.
We won't go deep into Gurriel. I just want to highlight Steamer loves Lourdes. They have him as the 80th hitter, and ADP has him at 139th hitter. So I almost brought him up tonight. We're not going to deep dive. I just want to mention him for comparing. Like, Steamer loves Gurriel, not a fan of Mitchell, is where I was going with that one. All right. Who's your next one? Because this is a polarizing draft day discussion.
Yeah, this is someone that we mentioned, I think, during the first projection show. As like we were just passing by and looking at names, and that is Victor Robles. He is Steamer's 115th hitter, but he has an ADP of 228, which makes him the hitter 134 in DC. So about 20 pick difference. This is fueled by his Steamer projections, fueled by 71 runs, which is pretty good. I think he's projected to be the leadoff hitter for the Mariners right now. 10 homers, so not terrible. Not good, not great, but it's not like it's Xavier Edwards. RBIs are bad too because he's a leadoff hitter, but he has 37 steals as his projection at 248 average. The average isn't ideal, but it's not hurting you. And I think, this is kind of like a Pete Crow Armstrong line, but he's going almost 100 picks later. And I think, where's PCA? Yeah, he might actually be ahead of PCA. He's projected higher than PCA right now by like 40 spots, which is a big difference, even though it's later in the rankings. But yeah, Edwards. They were kind of like the same player last year, Robles and Edwards, because they came up late and they both provided a ton of steals. But let me pull Xavier's underlying stats, or Victor Robles. Now, the hard hit is awful. You don't want him for power. You don't want him for power. The 261 XBA is pretty encouraging considering Steamer has him for 248. We know how fast Robles is. He is projected to hit leadoff for the Mariners right now. They could make a move that changes that because they do need lineup help. And if you think about Robles being your leadoff hitter, you would say you do need lineup help. But he did finally kind of come through. But they did sign him to a 2-year contract, I believe, last year, which kind of gives me assurance that they want to play him. He could bounce back to ninth, though. That's kind of where he hit, I think, with the Nationals a lot. Yeah, he hit 307 this past year, which Steamer is not buying at all. But at that ADP, like with a lot of other guys, even Mitchell kind of falls into that. So I guess Mitchell versus him is kind of interesting. The difference is that Robles is probably playing full time because he is a righty. I don't think he would sit much versus righties. It's not very common, but it's interesting. And I think also the injury history is tough too. But at this point in the ADP, it's going to hurt you less if he does get hurt. So if you need steals, I could see taking Robles at this range. But I think it's intriguing. I think it's not far off from the ADP rank, but it's he could be a slight buy if everything goes right.
Yeah,
a slight value.
I'm with you. Victor's interesting because last year he was very, very good. He was banged up with the back injury for a while, but when healthy, dude was very, very productive. So could make for a fun ADP debate later on in this preseason for sure. All right, we've each given 9. Our final ones to come. And it's only fitting that my final pick is someone that Ben texted me the second Steamer projections came out and said, dude, they love the mascot. Luis Rengifo. Steamer is a big fan. Steamer has the win. Luis Rengifo as the 48th hitter. I did not stutter. 48th hitter by projections. ADP has him as the 102nd hitter. ADP of around 170. They have Rengifo projected to play 134 games, career high. We've talked about this stuff before. 17 home runs after 6 last year. He was injured, and before people say no. Previous 2 years, 16 and 17. He's done this twice. 75 runs scored might be a push with this team, but again, hasn't played a ton full-time, and 66 RBIs is still maybe a bit aggressive. So the runs and RBIs are a bit aggressive. 23 steals after 24 last year before not stealing any bases. So does he keep his steals and regain his power? That's where it gets fun. They have 17 homers, 23 steals, 263 average, which is in line. Last year hit 300, was leading baseball. Previous years, 264. Okay, I can get behind that as well. We looked at last year, 2.5% barrel rate. Remember, the wrists, the hands. He was just a disaster with injuries. The XBA was 261, kind of goes in line with the projection here. We saw a 55% ground ball rate this year after being more of a 48% guy throughout his career. So this is a fun projection because I would love for it to hit, obviously. That would be a fun thing. But it's like, do you believe the power comes back? Do you believe the steals stay? Does the batting average regress but stay? Okay, does the runs and RBIs go up, which we've never seen before? There's a lot of questions with Rengifo. The flexibility is great on drafts. It's not what Steamer cares about, but we love it. I want to believe in this. I'm also know I am very, very, very heavily biased in this situation, and I'm hesitant. I almost believe he's like a 13 homer, 20 steal guy, which is still I'll take all things considered. But I'm more worried. The power and speed doesn't concern me as much as the runs and RBIs, to be honest, with the Angels. That's where they project them to go up to basically 150 runs and RBIs combined. I'm not sure I can get there with the Angels. So, Ben, before I keep going in circles about how much I love him and want to believe it, what are your thoughts on this? Because he had the wrist hand injury, so okay, I'll let the power slide for 1 year. But there's a lot of other things that took place too.
Yeah, he's interesting. But to your point on the lineup, right now it's projected to be Taylor Ward, Rengifo, Trout, Soler. That's not the worst.
Which I don't hate.
Group
You know,
of hitters
Hoppy coming after that. Okay.
Schanuel is then there's Schanuel, Neto, Hoppy, and then the best hitter of all time, Anthony Rendon. And then
not a horrible
Adele.
lineup, honestly, for the Angels.
No, I mean they just got killed by injuries last year, and Soler does help a lot. People were kind of head scratching that one, I think, but it makes sense if they're trying to compete. I mean, they signed Kikuchi now too, so maybe they think they have a shot. But with Rengifo, yeah, like the power metrics just collapsed. I don't know how much of that is timing with the wrist injury, because in the first 3 months he had two homers each month, so that's a pace of 12, which isn't far off from the 17 and 16 he had hit previously. It says that the barrel rate went down to 2.5%. That's kind of like Arraez territory, which is not good. Yeah. The ground ball rate skyrocketed. That's not good for power, over 54%. Doesn't walk a lot, so that's kind of concerning, but it helps though. So but the K rate was very low. It was only 14.5%. So I think the projection for the average could be maybe, well, it is in line with the XBA like you mentioned, but there is potential for growth because he doesn't strike out that much, or at least he made that adjustment this year. And with the low walk rate, he's getting more at bats, which means with a better average, it's going to help you more because you're not walking as less, and it's helping that weighted average, which I calculated to help do the rankings. And he's intriguing. He definitely went up in ADP. He was post pick 200 last year, and now he's inside the top 200. But yeah, I remember Rengifo was very liked by Steamer last year, and then the other systems kind of knocked him down a bit when you combine them all together. But I get maybe you should invite the Steamer creator into the Bubba and the Bloom show because you guys are all big fans.
Yeah, well, it's like, yeah, he needs to join the party and explain why he loves him as much as we do. All right, who is your last one here? Because this is a name that I want to get behind, but I have a problem with young players.
He's also one spot ahead of the mascot, and that's Junior Caminero, at least per Steamer. So Steamer has Caminero as the 47th hitter, and in ADP, he's the 61st hitter with an ADP of 103.6. The projected line is 77 runs, 29 homers, 90 RBI, 5 steals, 262 average, and almost 600 at bats. They have him for 590, and that's a monstrous line. When you look at the underlying metrics, granted he has a small sample because the Rays waited to call him up. His barrel rate was 11.8%. Hard hit was 45.7%. So those are both very good. EV was just below 90, which is okay. He had a poor contact rate. I mean, he's swinging pretty hard, it looks like. His XBA was only 240, but his K rate was only 21.5%, which isn't that bad. But he's so young, to your point about being wary about rookies. But I just remember watching Caminero like sometimes on MLB Network in the games they would simulcast, and he looked like a legit like stud hitter. Like his swing looked great, and he was only 21. His barrel rate was probably 75th, 8th percentile if he qualified. His bat speed's almost the top. So maybe if you can like cut it down a little bit, he might have a better average. But it's also intriguing or kind of hard because of I mentioned the Rays schedule dilemma. So what is that going to do for Caminero? I mean, hopefully he's young enough where he can kind of overcome any inconveniences that playing so many games on the road in a row or over the last 2/3 of the season may have on someone. But it's definitely an eye-opening projection that he's a 47th hitter, so he should be going probably top 80, 30, 90 essentially is his projection. And I think the average could be higher based on how good of a hitter he's been in the minors. I would probably take the chance at 103, honestly, even though, I don't know, even though for whatever reason, I thought he would have been higher in ADP, honestly, but I'm not sure why he's so low. Maybe because he didn't quite click, but it was a small sample, so who knows?
Yeah, my guess is the click / people being a little more aggressive at other positions. It's just kind of somebody has to fall. But I know there are the bandwagon Caminero people out there that are huge on him. So definitely interesting seeing Steamers so much in love with him. So that makes it a little more intriguing, and someone I might want to dig in on some more to see if I should be getting on board with this or sitting back and watching like I usually foolishly do with a lot of prospects. All right, that's 20 players, 10 each. Got a couple questions here in the chat, and then a couple questions from Twitter we'll get to. First off, Uncle Ted says, what about Garcia in Washington? Luis Garcia Jr. has pulled up his stuff, Ben. Is the 70th rated hitter according to Steamer, the 78th according to ADP. So Steamer likes him a little bit better than Steamer. He's got an ADP of around 136 right now. I love him. I've drafted him at least once, if not twice so far. 18 homers. 22 steals last year, hitting 282. I've always liked the hit tool, seeing the power and the speed come with it. It's been big. And Steamer's got him projected for 18 and 16 with the 278 average. Like, I'd sign up for that right now, which I have in a few leagues. So what's your thoughts when you look at Luis Garcia Jr.? We saw a career high hard hit rate last year, career high barrel rate. Everything in my mind that you want to see from a young player getting a real strong 140 games. Again, 25 this year, super young.
Yeah, he's been around for so long. It's kind of hard to comprehend that he's that young. And he had an issue where they weren't playing him all the time versus lefties. But in terms of the actual plate appearance percentage, he was just on the cusp of just below the 80% for at-bats or plate appearances versus right-handed pitchers. He was at 78%, so arguably full-time. And I think down the stretch they played him more often versus lefties, which is key for me because if he's going that early, 135, I want him to be a full-time player. And he's almost projected for 2020. He almost went that last year. So I definitely like him. He's projected it. Well, right now he's 4th on roster resource in the lineup for the Nationals, and he's a platoon bat, but I can't see them honestly batting Andres Chaparro or Trey Lipscomb over him at this point in his career. So that's probably one where I would say, okay, he was on the cusp of being a platoon bat last year, but at this point in his development, he'll probably play full time. And I like that ADP, considering how second base sounds from what I've heard without drafting yet.
Yep, it's a very, very enticing price tag. Uncle Ted also said, we just give him our thoughts on this. What do you think? I did a full starter fade in a Gladiator Friday and got Clark Schmidt, Ranger Suarez, Bueller, Tobias Myers, Cody Bradford, and DJ Hers with Uceta and Holton and Chad Green. I'll let you answer first, Ben, before I give my 2 cents on this.
I want to see the lineup. I don't want to see the pictures. I want to see how the lineup looks.
He tweeted it out. I remember seeing it.
I remember seeing him tweet about it, but I don't remember the lineup. Let's see how Holton looks. He is in the mix with Bo Brisky and Jason Foley right now per roster resource. Chad Green could be the closer now that Romano got cut, so that's a pretty good pick there. I don't know. I wouldn't do it for sure, but I know this is Uncle Ted's thing. But there's definitely a shot. Bueller could bounce back. Myers showed flashes, so did Cody Bradford and Hers. And I had Uceta in the main event, so I think he did a good job with that strategy considering who he took.
Yes, for the strategy, I'm with it. Strategy I would not do, but I get it, all things considered. All right, a couple of questions from the Twitterverse before we head out of here. We got Chad Clark asks, Hunter Green and Grayson Rodriguez, I'd appreciate your insights as to why they are right, and how they might be wrong for both better and worse. Both stood out to me. So let's start with Hunter Green. We didn't talk any pitchers, so got to switch over to the pitchers tab here, Ben. I'll let you start off with Hunter Green. What do you see when you look at Hunter Green?
Yeah, we actually talked about Green because of the strikeout projection. So
That's
they have
right.
him for 224 strikeouts. Steamer does with a 4.23 ERA and a 1.25 WHIP. I think what we said was the volume seemed too high. They have him for 189 innings, and with how hard he throws, and he hasn't gotten close to that total yet, I don't believe. So it's hard for me to be confident in any sort of significant workload increase for him this year, especially coming off I don't know what the injury was, his elbow or forearm probably. But yeah, his career high is 150, which was this past year. So projecting 40 more innings is asking a lot. But on a per inning basis, he could be great. It's just there's a lot of risk, and Steamer's not buying the ERA gains that he made. They think that also too, he had a massive cut in his homer to fly ball rate last year. Green was around 16%, 14% his first 2 seasons, and then it was cut in half to literally 6.9%, which was nice for him. But I don't know if you can expect that to stick, especially pitching in Cincinnati. So definitely a volatile pick if you take him early.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Very, very volatile. And we got Grayson Rodriguez. Reports came out this week that he's fully recovered and no restrictions this year. Steamer has him as the 30th pitcher off the board, 38th according to ADP. So they like him a little bit more than ADP. He's going around pick 95 in drafts. And the thing with the projection, they have 172 innings. We saw 116 last year before the injury, 122 the year before. If you count the minors, though, he threw 163. So I guess 172 isn't too crazy. Just coming off that injury, going back to full bore, 3.61 ERA. We know he's good there. Strikeouts, like if you believe the innings, I love the Grayson projection. I think it's in line with who he is. It's just to me a matter of do you like the innings or not, and that becomes the tricky part of it.
Him being the 30th starter is pretty high. So it's basically the cusp of our SP 2 and 3 and 15s. I'm not as worried. So I've heard people saying they're worried about the lat, but it's a muscle. It's on your side. I mean, it does connect up to your armpit, shoulder area, but it's not a shoulder injury in my mind. Depends on where on the lat, I guess it was, but it's a muscular thing. It's not a structural rotator cuff injury, as far as we know. I did have Grayson on that one main event, and look at the underlying numbers. I think he's a solid SP3 and a 15, or even in a 12. He had a mid 3 Sierra and XFIP. His xERA was 3.78. I remember watching him. He was pretty wild sometimes against the Yankees. Like he would just walk the bases loaded, and it was kind of frustrating. I mean, it was good for the Yankees, but bad for my fantasy team. But the ball rate was only 34%, which is good. Walk rate of 7.3, which after watching him, I'm kind of surprised it was that good considering the wildness that I've seen him pitch with. So yeah, I like Grayson as a bounce back. It's just that I would want him as my SP3 probably.
Yep, very, very fair. Michael Cicchini says the Braves outfield by Steamer, Acuna is the number 5 player. We saw much less than this projection when he returned with one bad knee, which I think we talked about on a recent show. And now it's second. Harris every year projects drafted top 45. How does he get there batting 6 to 9 unless we assume leadoff while Acuna is out? I agree on both accounts, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I think post his first ACL, Acuna was 24-17 or 15-29. I forget which year was the one he came back from injury. I think it was actually 2022 when he went 15-29. So the power definitely dropped down. I mean, he has had 40 homers twice though, and so I think his projection of 28-46 by Steamer is very aggressive, at least in the speed. He'll probably not be as aggressive first year back. He's still in his prime though. He's going to be 27, Acuna. So yeah, he's probably not a first rounder. I think he's supposed to miss time to start the year as well. So that also makes it tougher to draft him that early. And, but I mean, at the right price, Acuna still has great value. Someone pointed out very astutely that his K rate was only 11% in 2023 when he went off, and it's been 23% most the other 3 years around that year. So I don't expect him to hit high 3 or mid 300s again, or low 300s. Maybe the upper 200s is more of a better projection for Acuna. And then with Harris, yeah, like he might bat top 2 with Acuna out to start the season, but he needs an injury, which you can't predict. And I mean, his rate stats always project so well. Like I think he's a top 20 hitter per Steamer right now. And he hasn't, like you said earlier, I think who you were talking about, but as one of the other guys who goes much later in drafts, is that Harris hasn't reached that high.
Parker Meadows.
Yeah, Meadows. Yeah, so Harris is projected for 26 and 22 with a 285 average, almost 100 runs. I mean, if the Braves are back to being the Braves, he could score 100 runs batting in the middle of the lineup. But it's hard to project that with what his career's been so far. So, yeah, he's probably Steamer says he's a value at his ADP, but I think where he's going, Harris is probably a little bit safer than what Steamer thinks.
Yep, that is fair. Jeff Biddle on Twitter says Junior Caminero and Royce Lewis are interested in Steamer. Talked about both of them. Caminero is slightly better in fantasy stats. Lewis slightly better in OBP and slugging. How do you view them? We had you covered there, Jeff. Don't you worry. We got you, buddy. And then Wave Boy says Matt McClain's projections. Tyler Stevenson too. Stevenson feels low. McClain feels bold. All right, let's talk Matty McClain here first. Let me get back to the hitter side of things here. Matt McClain is the 54th hitter on Steamer. They have him ADP has him a 72nd hitter. McClain 54th according to Steamer. Obviously coming off the injury, looked healthy and good in the fall league, which is a promising situation. They have him for 25 homers and 18 steals. We haven't seen 20 plus homers yet from him and a 260 average. So what are your thoughts on this? Again, he has only played 103 games. If he plays 141, 25 is probably understandable at least.
So I actually do have last year's projections pulled up in a separate workbook. He's projected for 78, 24, 80, 17 McClain. Last year he was 79, 22, 75, 18. That has him as so this year's projection has him as hitter 54. And then last year I believe he was hitter 55. So they basically did a copy and paste of his projection, which is bold. But I mean, when you miss the entire year with an injury, what else are you going to do, really?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So in the where is he? His value is they're saying he's a value of McClain based on his ADP. 72 is the ADP hitter rank versus 54, so about 20 spots, 18. I remember he had some issues with his contact, if I'm not mistaken, McClain. Let me look it up because I don't have it readily available. Yeah, he had a high K rate in 2023, 28.5%. He had a good barrel rate, but his XBA is 255. So he's at risk for hurting you in average. And I forget what the injury was, but I wouldn't project him to be a top almost 50 hitter. So I think ADP is definitely a little safer, but yeah, but who knows? And then was there a part two to that?
I was going to say the other one was Tyler Stevenson, and Steamer has Stevenson as the 193rd hitter. ADP has him as 88, so a massive delta of 105 there. ADP is around 153. Ben and I talked off the air, and I've talked about this on Steamer shows forever, is catcher Steamer projections are pretty not great because playing time projections and other things. So you got a grain of salt these when it comes to it, but like they have Stevenson playing in 124 games. He's played at least 138 the last 3 out of 4 years. 16 homers. He's better than that. 253 average. That might be fair. So I think it's a little low for Stevenson, but a lot of that's playing time dependent. What are your thoughts when you look at Tyler Stevenson's projection?
It's a solid catcher projection, I think. His average is 253 with 16 homers. Both are okay. I'd rather have that as my catcher 2, though. I think he's going in the catcher 1 range, but I have to see what the rest of the catchers project for. And I know a lot of them are disappointments last year, so that's probably why Stevenson moved up as much as he did, about 100 picks, I think. Yeah, to your point, you can throw out the 193 rank for Steamer. That's in a vacuum. Like when you have rankings, there's a catcher bias, and then, I mean, I don't have catcher or the positions here, but if I were to filter on the catcher position, I'm sure it probably is in line a little bit with the ADP catcher rank. But yeah, I kind of gave Ryan a little dirt or whatever the word is for him taking him in the meatball draft, but there were some promising signs after I looked, and I think Stevenson, especially in that park, he has some upside for decent power, and he was on fire at the end of the year, so maybe there's a chance that he carries that into 2025.
Yeah, Stevenson is one of my I'm higher on him this year than I've been in a long time, especially where he's going compared to other catchers. If you wait on catchers or an early catcher too, I'm liking Stevenson quite a bit this year, so we'll see if that burns me or not, and how many listeners take him ahead of me now. So we got that going too. All right, Ben. On that note, we're going to wrap this up. That was a lot of fun. Covered a ton of players. People in the chat liked it quite a bit. Hopefully, the listeners enjoy it as well. But that's a fun exercise. Like, part of me wants to do more on another show, but I don't think we need to keep doing Steamer all the time. But it's just a fun exercise to kind of point out differentials and see where sitting dogs lie, essentially. Any final thoughts before we head out of here on another fun episode of Bench with Bubba?
No, I did a lot of talking that show, so I need to shut up and rest.
Well, you get a week off, so go enjoy
true.
it.
Yeah, I will say. I'm not gonna say where you're going, but I hope you enjoy your vacation. It should be a fun time.
We'll do, and people will find out soon enough. They'll see pictures, and hopefully, I'm in a good mood. Let's just put it that way. That things are good, but yeah, it's gonna be fun. Thanks for joining me as always, everybody. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be back with you guys. There'll be episodes for you this Friday and 2 next week, so don't worry about it. You will be covered as always. But for now, check out Ben on Twitter at BreakingBen_T. I am at BDentric. And this was Benched with Bubba, episode 700. Catch y'all next time.